have you done? That poor plant. You don't even feel bad, do you? He's like, no, let me get this one next. Stop hurting the plant. Hey y'all, it's Becky here from the Beckisphere, where we talk about climate news and solutions. You have entered the climate recap, where we look at what is being done to reduce the impacts of, mitigate, and prepare for climate change. If you would like to stay up to date with one of the most important topics facing humanity, I highly suggest you hit that subscribe button below and ring the bell so you are notified every single time I post. This time, we will be covering news from January 1st to 16th, so let's get started. Let's start with things that relate to climate changing. The first one is science organizations like the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and NASA have confirmed that 2021 was the 6th warmest year on record, and the record goes back to the year 1880. Additionally, the world's oceans hit a new heat record last year. Recording ocean temperature goes back to 1955. A new international study published in Nature Climate Change found that global warming decreases connectivity among coral populations, which is a process fundamental to coral recovery. Warmer waters increase larval mortality and alter dispersal patterns, which can hurt corals' ability to spread warming-resistant genes. And this year isn't starting off great in certain areas, with Buenos Aires, Argentina reaching 106 degrees Fahrenheit and Western Australia reaching 123 degrees Fahrenheit for the second week of January. Granted, this is Australia's summer, but that's still crazy high temperatures. 106 was the second highest temperature recorded in South America in 115 years, and the extreme drought has caused 700,000 people to lose power, increasing risk of heat strokes and death. In other climate change news, rapid glacier retreat rates have been observed in West Antarctica, and Malaysia is seeking $3 million from the UN's Climate Fund to pay for damages caused by deadly flooding they experienced in late December. Okay, now let's move on to climate victories, starting with the international news. England announced it will begin paying farmers taxpayer money to rewild their land as part of the government's push to spur large-scale nature recovery projects. These projects could either be full rewilding or adjusting land management to prioritize wildlife habitats and species recovery. They're starting with bids for 10 to 15 pilot projects, and they're hoping to rewild 10,000 acres in the first 2 years, which is about 10 times the size of Richmond Park in London. Now over to France, starting in March, car advertisements will have to come with a message encouraging consumers to walk, bike, or take public transportation before they use their personal vehicles. This applies to all forms of advertising, and any company that doesn't abide to this rule can be fined up to $56,000. What a cool idea. Meanwhile, the European Court of Human Rights has asked Norway to respond to charges made by activists by April 13th. Environmental activists have been trying to halt new Norwegian drilling projects in the Arctic. They originally tried to go through Norwegian courts several times, but after several defeats, the activists have decided to go to the International Court for support. The European Court of Human Rights picked up the impact case, which means that the results of the case could impact more than just Norway. Activists claim to the court that the drilling breaches fundamental freedoms like freedom of right to life and family. The length of time in which the court gave Norway to respond is already unprecedented, as previous rulings by the court have taken an average of 6 years. And I'll keep you posted on the case. In other Nordic news, the Nordic investment bank SEB predicts that the energy crisis will spur a global increase in clean energy investments by 25%, exceeding $400 billion by 2022. In 2022. We are in 2022. Isn't that weird? I'm still not used to it. Anyways, now over to the US. 6 solar plants are expected to cover coal mines in Virginia. This is part of a larger project by the Nature Conservancy to provide economic opportunities and energy security to coal communities in Appalachia, as well as give use to these waste sites. The Nature Conservancy purchased those sites in 2019. Cleanup is currently underway in those 6 locations. In Idaho, Idaho Power, the monopoly utility company for the state, announced that it will phase out coal power by 2028 on their way to become reliant on only clean energy by 2045. Idaho Power owns 3 coal-fired plants, and funny enough, none of them are actually in Idaho. Rather, one is in Oregon, one is in Nevada, and the other is in Wyoming. Speaking of coal, it's been reported that a coal plant called Granttown has lost an essential deal meant to keep them afloat. The Public Service Commission of West Virginia rejected a proposal by the Granttown power plant to buy a power purchase contract with the subsidiary utility giant First Energy to be the main energy supplier for a cryptocurrency mine. Without this deal, Granttown could die. And this is important because in 2020, almost all the coal provided by West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin's family's coal company, Enersystems, went to Granttown. Manchin earned $500,000 from Enersystems in 2020, which supposedly went to a blind trust that's managed by his son. Many people point to his ties in coal as the reason why he won't back the President Biden's Build Back Better Act. So what happens if his coal money dries up? Another interesting development along this vein is that coal miners in West Virginia have actually come out in support of the act, forcing Manchin to choose between interests of coal miners and coal owners. Though I have a feeling which one he cares more about. The next climate victory takes us to Texas, which just passed the strictest flood disclosure law in the country. It applies specifically to rental properties and came into effect January 1st. It requires landlords to disclose flood history of a rental unit and if the property has significant risk of flooding. The law allows tenants to break a lease if they were not provided adequate flooding information prior to signing the agreement. Texas joins only 5 other states who have any flood disclosure laws. And here are some other climate victory headlines reported between January 1st and 16th that I thought were interesting, but I obviously can't elaborate on everything. I will share my favorite climate victory point at the end of this video, so make sure that you watch until then. But for US news, more than half of states plan to seek oil well cleanup funds this year. Candidates in Massachusetts' governor's race are running on climate. HydroStore secured $250 million from Goldman Sachs amid rising investor interest in long-duration storage. Gavin Newsom released a new budget for California and it has billions to fight climate change. The government aims to double cover crops to fight climate change. New York could make history with a Fashion Sustainability Act, which is now up for debate in the New York Senate and Assembly committees now. The government moves to restrict oil leasing in Alaska. The EPA finally is cracking down on dangerous coal ash storage ponds. The White House is working to protect science from political meddling. The Interior is holding an auction for offshore wind in New York and New Jersey. IKEA bought land damaged by a hurricane in Florida to plant forests. The Energy Department plans to announce the first 1,000 Clean Energy Corps hires to work on climate change projects. And the roofing company GAF is working to beat Tesla in the integrated solar roof industry. And internationally, companies are playing with the idea of wind-powered cargo ships. Some say adding sails could reduce ship fuel consumption by 20%. The shipping company Maersk has sped up its decarbonization timeline to be net zero by 2040. Cornwall could become the UK's electric car battery hub after discovering that lithium carbonate can be produced from mica in granite rock. Taiwan's largest pension fund plans to issue Asia's first climate change stock mandate worth $2.3 billion. Canadian courts approved a settlement agreement to resolve class action litigation related to safe drinking water in First Nations communities. A new type of heat pump system launched in the Netherlands might make it easier for people to switch to an electric method of heating water. France began its new ban on plastic wrap for certain types of fruits and vegetables, mainly the ones that have natural covers like oranges. Companies are coming up with new ways to decrease how many microplastic fibers end up in the ocean from washing machines. About 700,000 strands of microfiber shed from your clothes every wash, representing about 86% of the microplastics collected in seawater by Ocean Race Europe. Delicate is actually the worst setting for this, by the way. A new study found that rich nations could see a double climate dividend by switching to plant-based foods because it decreases their carbon footprints and increases land available for carbon uptake. The Romanian government is pushing to add climate change education in schools. The UK government is being sued by Client Earth and Friends for the Earth for their pie-in-the-sky net zero climate strategy. And the Czech Republic announced that they are going to phase out coal by 2033 and boost their nuclear power capabilities. I feel like 2033 is pretty late, but I mean, it's something, and honestly, it's more than some other countries, as we will see in a sec. Check out the links to these stories in the source list, which is linked below. Now here's a few stories that I can't decide if they're climate victories or fails. The first one is that Germany announced it's shutting down half of its remaining 6 nuclear power plants, claiming it's part of the country's move towards net zero emissions. Determining if this is a climate victory or fail really depends on where you fall on nuclear. In my opinion, it's closer to a fail because nuclear power is a good source for clean, consistent power, and by shutting them off, Germany will become more resilient on fossil fuels. It frustrates me when countries are faster to shut down nuclear plants than they are to shut down fossil fuel power plants because the optics are just better, I guess, but it's just like, ugh. That being said, Germany is still committed to stop burning coal by 2030. Another topic that's both a victory and a fail is that the S&P Global just purchased the climate modeling company, The Climate Service. On one hand, it's a good thing because big financial firms are beginning to incorporate climate risk in their assessments, but it's bad because the data collected by these climate modeling companies stop becoming publicly available when they're purchased like this. Over in Indonesia, the country announced that it would stop exporting coal, which is great. It later decided to release 22 more ships of coal, justifying it with the energy crisis, which is a little bit of a fail. And then in Florida, an African-American community is being ignored after twice blocking the development of a utility-scale solar farm slated to be built next to them. This is an example of an unjust expansion of clean energy. We should never stoop to this level during the transition. And we continue to look at the solar industry in Florida as we start off our full climate fail list. Florida just passed a new bill that limits the ability for homeowners and businesses to offset the cost of rooftop solar installations by selling back power to the company, a process called net metering. Without this money back incentive, this could heavily discourage people from putting solar panels on their homes. This bill was supported by utility companies who'd allegedly profit from consumer reliability on utility-scale solar instead. Zooming out a little bit, the U.S. Government Accountability Office has requested the Department of Energy takes a second look at how they're giving money for carbon capture and storage projects. So far, the DOE has invested $1.1 billion in 11 CCS projects that have ultimately failed. 8 of these projects were connected to unbuilt coal power plants, 7 of which never ended up getting built. That's right, the DOE spent millions of dollars in developing new coal plants with carbon capture connected. The projects didn't continue because coal isn't an economically viable form of energy generation, despite what it looks like right now. Actually, the world's sole CCS project connected to a large power plant, which is located in Saskatchewan, Canada, caught 43% less CO2 this year than last year after problems with the CO2 compressor motor forced it to be shut down for a few months. Sask Power insists that they've solved the problem, but environmental activists who are not a fan of CCS cite this as a reason why we should not invest so much in the coal-related CCS projects. Now over to Europe, the EU has stalled voting on a draft proposal to consider nuclear energy and natural gas green forms of energy generation to invest in. Funny enough, Germany has actually said they wouldn't support it because they don't consider nuclear clean. That's right, not natural gas. That's not the problem. The nuclear is part of the problem. Like, what is happening right now? Natural gas is not a clean form of energy generation, especially with many plants having methane leaking problems. Methane is a more potent form of greenhouse gas than CO2. So, like, we should not consider natural gas to be clean. And I hope that it doesn't go through because of that. At least they're not firing up a new coal plant like China just did though. This is China's largest coal plant yet, producing 1,000 megawatts of power. The country has said that it won't start phasing down coal power until 2025. And continuing the topic of coal, Brazil announced it's extending its coal use and subsidies until 2040 and under the guise of a just transition. Okay, now they're starting to piss me off. But honestly, I do think a substantial amount of blame should fall on wealthy countries for this because developing countries still haven't gotten the promised $100 billion to help them transition. So like, I'm not surprised that a country like Brazil is going to start acting out like this. But still, it's not an excuse for Brazil's behavior. And here are some other climate fails from January 1st to 16th. There's been a jump in deforestation of the world's most biodiverse savanna that's alarming Brazilian scientists. Late-stage deforestation is enhancing storm trends in coastal West Africa. Seismic tests by Shell Oil have been approved by Southern Africa minister with some rules, even though environmental activists and experts have warned that this will harm the marine mammal populations. A new study found that the U.S. Midwest Corn Belt, which grows 75% of U.S. corn, has lost 35% of its fertile topsoil since European colonization in the 1600s, reducing how much carbon the soil can uptake. And airlines have been flying empty planes called ghost flights to maintain takeoff and landing schedules, even though the number of people flying has dropped during the pandemic. Basically, useless emissions. Finally, let's talk about fossil fuel fails before we reach my favorite climate victory of the 2-week period. The U.S. Department of the Interior has reported that the U.S. has twice as many abandoned oil and gas wells than previously thought, moving the number from 56,000 to 130,000 orphaned wells. These wells can leak methane, so it's really important to make sure that they're properly plugged, which of course many fossil fuel companies have not bothered doing. That was only a fossil fuel fail point though. And now to my favorite climate victory. Kohler Power Group in the US is working on using game theory mathematics to manage microgrids. Game theory is a branch of mathematics dedicated to modeling and predicting how independent agents behave to cooperative or competitive settings. This idea was actually started by Gila Technologies, a 6-year-old startup from Massachusetts that Kohler recently bought. Gila is in charge of 24 microgrids in the US and is using game theory to manage integrated solar, EVs, batteries, fuel cells, backup generators, and other distributed energy resources, or DERs. I think this is super cool because clean energy generation will require more backflow of energy, like homes giving energy from their solar panels back to utilities. So the grid needs to be more flexible and dynamic than it has been in the past. Plus it's also good for, like stability, national security, all that good stuff. Gila's method allows distributed energy resources to self-manage how much energy they're taking up or letting down, creating a self-healing grid system. This method is potentially also more scalable than a command and control approach because it doesn't require a centralized control system to work. And that was the news from January 1st to 16th. Please let me know in the comment section below which news point you found the most interesting. Until next time, remember to talk about the climate crisis every single day and to support your local news organizations. Thank you to the people on Patreon who help me pay for my equipment and the many new subscriptions that make these recaps possible. A special shout out to the climate confident and courageous patrons David H., FK, Norman Annell, Greg H, and Paul B. I greatly appreciate your support. If you would like to join my Beccasphere patron community, check out the link in the description box below. Or if you would like to give me a one-time donation, then you can check out the Buy Me a Coffee link, which is also found below. I hope to see y'all next time in the Beccasphere. Bye for now.